welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's a trauma psychologist, professor, speaker, and founder of Science for Survivors because trauma was never yours. No other than Dr. Christal Badour.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Welcome, Miss Crystal, on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I
Absolutely.
miss?
Yeah. So you gave a nice intro at the beginning. So my background is as a trauma psychologist. I am also a professor at the University of Kentucky. I am a founder of Science for Survivors, which is a national telehealth therapy platform. I also do forensic assessments related to supporting court cases where there are questions of trauma. I also train clinicians in our best evidence based approaches to treating problems that may develop after trauma, like post traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorders. And I consult with organizations on how to bring in the best practice approaches to taking a trauma informed care perspective in their work. And then finally, I'm really passionate about bringing trauma science to the general public. I think there's a lot of information out there that you can access, particularly on social media. Um, and not all of it is accurate and backed by science. And so I think the people who need this information the most often have some of the hardest time getting it. So, really, one of my biggest goals with Science for Survivors is to get information out there, real science, so that it can help people in their recovery from trauma.
Real science indeed. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Miss Crystal. Thank you. And today let's talk about what most people get wrong about trauma and what the science actually shows. Let's start with the major myth, the idea that trauma is defined solely by the event itself. How does the science of subjective experience of neurobiology reshape this outdated definition?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, we have a little bit of a confusing situation here where we tend to use this word trauma really broadly to define both events that have happened in our lives. And these are often really stressful situations. People often think about situations that they've heard of or seen on movies, TV, that sort of thing. And the first thing that comes to mind for many people is combat, war veterans. And combat certainly can be a traumatic event, but there are many other things. So we often think about any situations where someone's life was in danger, or they were seriously harmed, or thought they might be harmed, or they experience some type of sexual violation. And that can happen directly to someone, but it can also be something that you've witnessed happen to someone else, or you've even learned about it happening to someone close to you in your life. And then the final way that we think about this is situations where people are repeatedly encountering distressing situations in the context of their work. So, for example, 911 operators or first responders, that type of thing. So we have the event itself, and in many cases, people have experienced across their life multiple different types of traumatic events. But then we also use this word trauma to describe how people respond to those events. So, what happens immediately after, the reactions that people have, but also sometimes the symptoms or distressing experiences that people have for many years after the event has passed. And so, by calling all of that trauma, it makes it a little bit difficult to break apart and make sense of what is actually happening and going on. And we know that no one person will respond to the same event in the same way. And so we can't just define the experiences of trauma responding based on what actually happened. We know that um, a huge component of this is how the brain and the nervous system, the body reacts in these types of events to really help keep us alive. And the way that it does those things, that automatic stress response, is really helpful in that moment in keeping us alive. And for some people, those responses, maybe feeling jumpy or alert or on edge, or really being triggered by memories of the experience, those things tend to improve over time for most people. But some people actually get a little bit stuck in this process where their brain is trying to bring up that memory frequently to process it and make sense of what has happened. And that can be really stressing and overwhelming. And for some people, they may need some help from a mental health professional, also from other people in their lives, people who care for them, to help them work through what has happened to them.
Interesting, Miss Crystal. Many people believe that if you don't have vivid Hollywood style flashbacks, you don't have PTSD. What are the more subtle yet equally debilitating symptom presentation that often go unrecognized?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, so we often think about flashbacks. I think that comes to mind again because when we see PTSD portrayed in the media, it is often with very vivid flashbacks. And a flashback really is that idea of it's almost like you're reliving the situation as if it were happening to you right now in this moment. And people sometimes even will talk about almost like I can smell the smells or hear the sounds that were happening in that moment. And that does happen for some people with PTSD, but many others do not experience flashbacks. One kind of key feature of PTSD is that everyone who experiences this particular reaction to trauma will have some type of unwanted or distressing memories of the trauma. So it may come in the form of nightmares during sleep. And the nightmares sometimes might be replaying the details of what happened, but sometimes it's more like thematically related, like being chased or being harmed in some way. So it can look a little different based on the person. And then the other things that we see may be more situations in someone's life. It can be people, places, a song on the radio. It could be certain feelings, like if someone who experienced childhood abuse really frequently felt um, scared or distressed if there's any kind of conflict going on. When they feel that same feeling, it can bring it up and kind of trigger that memory for them. So, in that case, we can see that people may just have memories that pop up in their mind, sometimes seemingly out of the blue, but sometimes in response to triggers in their environment. And all of these kinds of symptoms are what we think about as kind of a hallmark of PTSD. It's the brain's way of trying to bring back up what happened, spend some time processing it, and trying to make sense of where it fits into their understanding in their life. And there are many other symptoms of PTSD as well, but for everyone with PTSD, that memory component, that unwanted, and we call them intrusive, they kind of just come on into your brain when you're not ready to think about it or not trying to think about it. But that's a characteristic feature for PTSD.
Miss Crystals, there's a pervasive, or yes, pervasive cultural narrative that trauma is something you should be able to get over or
Mhm.
put behind you with enough willpower. How does misunderstand the brain survival based rewiring and actually cause more harm?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think that people, and I see this a lot with survivors where they talk to me about, why can't I just get over this? It's a weakness, it's something wrong with me. And the reality is, if we just had willpower, we'd all just put that out of our minds. And we know that that's not possible for many people. And that really has to do with the fact that our brain after a trauma is trying to make sense of ways to keep us safe in the future. And so it doesn't think about trauma in the same way that it thinks about other stressful events that may have happened in our life that we are easily able to perhaps move on from. It's really trying to collect all the information it can and bring that up and rehash that memory so that it can prepare us for the potential of future situations that could put us in harm's way. And what we know is that over time, as the brain has that opportunity to process those memories and those experiences and to collect new information about actually now I'm safe, um, that it is usually able to work through that, and we find that those distressing symptoms do start to go down. um, but that doesn't happen for everyone. And in part, we might wonder, well, why? Why are some people able to process that and others really do need some help? And it has to do in large part with the systems and the people we have in our lives and the ways in which we interact with those memories that make it easier or harder to move on from. So, for many people, they have a lot of other stressors, or they may not have strong social supports in their lives. They may already have been struggling with other mental health difficulties that make it really taxing and really difficult to be able to give the brain the space that it needs to process what has happened. So, for many people, when those memories kind of come up, they take all the tools in their toolbox to work through that and to try to manage it on their own. And a lot of times what that involves is like, I can't really deal with this overwhelming, these feelings and experiences that keep coming back to me. And so I'm going to find ways to push that aside. I'm going to avoid that. Some people turn to using alcohol or other substances to help them just manage and get through the day. And it takes that opportunity to really pull it up, break it down, work through it, to be able to help the brain process that. And we as trauma psychologists and other mental health professionals with training in this space have studied for many years what are the best ways that we can support people in doing that. And what do we know from how the brain works and processes that to be able to support people to do that in a way that feels manageable and meaningful. And it's not a weakness. It is that sometimes we need some assistance in this space to be able to do that. And we find that for people who are able to work through their trauma in therapy, we often find that the memory doesn't go away. It never goes away, and you never go back to how things were. But people can get to a space where it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming, where they can bring it up, and it still may feel distressing, but it doesn't derail everything else that they have going on or trying to prioritize in their lives.
Miss Crystal, what does the research say about big T trauma versus little t trauma? What is the helpful distinction, or does it create a false hierarchy of suffering that leads people to minimize their own experiences?
Mm, yeah, I think that this is I hate big T trauma versus little T trauma. um, we talk about big T trauma. I mean, people do often talk about big T trauma as kind of single events that are catastrophic in nature. They might be really life threatening situations, things that most people would agree would be traumatic or highly distressing to most people. So, kind of an experience of sexual violence or a serious accident or a combat situation, things like that, that people commonly think of in terms of trauma. And then we talk about this idea of sort of little t trauma, I say in quotes here, as being events that are painful, that may be kind of chronic stressors, maybe difficulties like loss in relationships or other situations like bullying, criticism, things that aren't life threatening but can also be very impactful in someone's life. And in the research space, particularly, we do think about making this distinction for understanding trauma reactions that can lead to PTSD symptoms. This distinction has been really controversial, even amongst researchers, as long as PTSD has been around as a diagnosis, because there is some research to show that while those, if you will, big T traumas that involve oftentimes life threatening situations or serious injury or harm, that those are quite likely in some cases to lead to PTSD, that also these chronic stressors, we find that people can sometimes show the same pattern of symptoms. And so the distinction, many people have argued, may not be as clear and as helpful as we once thought. Although some of my colleagues would strongly disagree with me. But I think what's really important here, again, is not necessarily of the event itself, but how the person felt during the event in terms of their sense of safety, and the violation that they experienced in some situations, maybe where they weren't in physical danger, and then how they've reacted to that afterward. That's really what's most important. And as a trauma therapist, we try to stay out of the business of categorizing, like, oh, this counts and this doesn't, because that's not helpful for people and can really make them feel like their experience doesn't matter in the same way that someone else's does, when really what matters is how people are healing and how they're coping with what has happened in their lives.
Interesting, Miss Crystal. Interesting indeed. And as a founder and a trauma psychologist, as well as professor, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, my short term goal has been really launching Science for Survivors. I actually launched it earlier this year, and starting to build my practice and taking some of the science that I've been working on for more than a decade out to people who need it. And actually, I have a goal. It might be lofty, but between now and the end of next year, my goal is to actually go on 52 podcasts. I'm sort of one per week for the year of 2026, so that I can bring that information to people, because that feels really important to me in my life right now. Um, and then long term, I just really hope to expand this work and make it more accessible to people. So we're working right now on some research on how we can best meet the needs of people who have various difficulties after trauma, and how we can find out what survivors really prioritize and what they want to come out of treatment, so that we can try to meet people where they are. So we'll be working on that for the next few years, and I'm really excited to hear from survivors and to get a sense of their perspectives in ways that haven't always been featured as heavily in the research as I think it should be.
Well, good luck to your goals, Miss Crystal. I'm looking forward for more success. So please do come over to all my podcasts and be my guest. And
Thank
what
you. I
will,
definitely will.
what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
So people who are interested in careers in trauma psychology and mental health, there is such a need for it. And there are many different pathways to get here. So I happen to be a clinical psychologist, but there are many ways to support trauma survivors. One example, even outside of the mental health space, is actually I work with our local rape crisis center with many people who serve as advocates, and serve in volunteer on crisis hotlines. There are many ways to get involved and to support people that work best for you. And so I think it's just a matter of getting started and figuring out what's the space where you can best help others while also taking care of yourself.
Yes. Self care, people. Self care. and Miss Crystal, thank you for that advice. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Absolutely. I was thinking about this. There have been so many that have influenced my journey, but I chose two that have influenced me more recently and have really stuck with me. So, one is a personal narrative, not of my own, but a book called Enough, a memoir of mistakes, mania, and motherhood. It's written by Amelia Zachary, who is an incredible trauma survivor who shares her story of navigating a sexual assault and development of PTSD. And then she also lives with bipolar disorder. And I think it's just a really relatable, um, just empowering and impressive experience of hope and recovery. And so I'd like to lift up her story. And another book that has been influencing my thinking a lot lately is a book called Pure by Linda K. Klein. She writes about her experience with purity culture in the religious community that she grew up in, and messages that she received and that she's interviewed others who have received around sex and sexuality that have made it difficult to navigate intimacy as adults. And I think the importance there, particularly for sexual assault survivors, which is a community that I work with really regularly, is very important. And so I think for people to be thinking more and talking more about sexual health and wellness is something I would really like to see, because it's so important for so many people, and it's often kind of a taboo topic that people are reluctant to talk openly about.
Yes, and thank you so much for that recommended books. Miss Crystal, and before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in third season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101, love letters, movie 101 review, music 101 our fourth season, science 101, sex 101 in second season, and my baby podcast law 101, mental health 101, Bible versus 101, and coming this December, Entrepreneur 101. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Crystal, finally, if you could correct one public misconception about trauma with a simple, clear takeaway from the science, what would it be?
I think that I think people kind of going back to the idea that it has to fit a certain experience, that if your experience doesn't fit what we think about oftentimes as being a trauma, that it doesn't matter. And I think that that is a message that people often get wrong, and they really do think that what happened to me doesn't count. And I think what happened to you does. And I just want to say to anyone out there listening that you're not alone, that many people experience trauma, and in whatever form it has happened, there is hope out there for you.
Yes, people, the hope is always in the corner. So grab it, Miss Crystal. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please expound the phrases on your website? What is all about science for survivors, real tools, real hope built for survivors?
Yeah, so really the goal on this is to think about the idea that science is there for you, that there are real tools that can help you and can make a change in your life, because trauma really never was your whole story, and there's a lot more to tell.
Yes, a lot more people, and let it go, let it go. So, Miss Crystal, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your business, or whatever project that you're doing right now?
Yes, thank you. I would love for you to check out my website, scienceforsurvivors.com. There's helpful information building there with my blog, information for people in the public, also therapist training information, therapy access, as well as consultation opportunities for professionals who might need some additional support in this space.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Christal Badour or Dr. Christal Badour because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering and advocacy like this to come. So, Miss Christal, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maricon people, see you soon.